Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. Max Verstappen reveals a potential hurdle in his title charge. He effectively needs to win everything from now to the end of the season if he wants to take the world driver's crown, but he believes that based on the car's performance in Mexico, there is another upcoming track that will not be good for the RB21. Can Red Bull get on top of this in time? Will it matter if McLaren do the job in the next couple of races? Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. There's loads of drama today. That is the Brazilian Grand Prix trophy, by the way. We'll get back to that in a second. Quickly, Colapinto, rumour has had it for some time he was going to stay at Alpine. Apparently now that is a thing. I don't think it's been confirmed or anything, but it's a major rumour. Briatore has said he's been performing at Gasly's level. He's improved a lot lately. The implication is, and he's got money to back him, he's not going to be going anywhere. That's probably expected. The Brazilian Grand Prix is coming up next week. Of course, not this weekend. We had the double header. Thought this is pretty funny. Hamilton tweeted in 2022 all these Brazilian flags, and then he did it again. But you can see when he was like spamming the Brazil flag emoji and then got tired of doing it. So then he copied and pasted everything, and then he copied it a few times. So you can see the gaps where he did that. But anyway, that Grand Prix is coming up soon. But we're not over Mexico quite yet, and there's still been lots of drama about what happened at turn 1. So Karun Chandhok came up with his idea. Year after year we see the first sequence of corners causes issues at Mexico. If they tweaked it a bit to make it like Bahrain, it would be less of an issue. And look, does he have a point? I can see it, right? The run down to Bahrain turn 1, it's more like this. I mean, it's not a brilliant drawing. It isn't exactly like Bahrain, but, you know, he gets the point across. You could even try to make it like old Abu Dhabi or something. The way that it is laid out, it's begging you to drive over the grass, right? Like it wants you to drive over the grass, and that's what has happened numerous times. Max, of course, ended up all the way out here. Max was following this red line of Chandhok's and then narrowly avoid hitting the wall, and then he was back on the track. So we do see this year after year. The question has become, okay, what do we do about it? This is one of the options. You just make it all gravel because, look, I quite like that turn 1, turn 2 sequence. I actually think it's quite a good series of corners. It can set you up for a nice switchback. Like, we know that it's a double DRS detection point. If the defending driver does hold off the attacking driver, there's a chance that if they get the switchback right, they can still get the move done into turn 4. So, like, I don't want every turn 1 that's like this to end up looking like Bahrain. They could play around with it for sure, but I don't mind the way the corner complex is if you take measures to prevent what we are often now seeing. So look, could you throw gravel there? Yeah, you could. Could you put a lake, a moat, a pond, or some sort of water hazard? I don't think that's going to pass the health and safety checks, but, you know, something that I'd like to see, right, to prevent the drivers from going that way as much as is possible. Of course, Max Verstappen made what was a very ambitious attempt around the outside to make it 4 wide, but I also think that Max realised, as many of the others also know, the other drivers, because they've raced at this circuit plenty of times before, what can happen at turn 1. And when you watch a lot of this race back, certainly for Charles Leclerc, he easily could have stayed on the track if he wanted to, but he opted to go over the grass. Verstappen probably doesn't go for this absolutely outrageous overtake attempt if he knows that he can't just kind of bail out and get away with it, right? Because, yeah, he made it 4 wide. It was incredibly ambitious, but he knew he was going to be okay to bail out, go onto the grass. To be fair, a lot of drivers probably would have crashed into the wall. It was amazing car control for Max to actually keep it alive. But there have been loads of questions, because even Brundle says that for what Max did, I mean, we talked a lot about Leclerc because there was the drama with Hamilton, but I think in Max's case, there's also an argument to say that, you know, was he ever really intending to make that corner? Now, yeah, he got pushed wide. He found himself on the curb. There was no way he was going to get the braking done there. But I think it is actually a fair argument, right? Because when Verstappen elected to go 4 wide here, how is Max ever, even if he can brake it properly, how is he ever going to make it through turn 1, right? It's just, like, it's not really going to happen, is it? So, like, I do wonder if Max's thought process was to a certain degree like, well, there's a good chance on this first corner I'm just going to bail out and go off the track. So Brundle kind of talks about that and says he doesn't believe Max had any intention to ever make that corner, and Brundle thinks that anyone doing such a thing should get a drive-through to stop the silliness. Now, I understand where Brundle's coming from. I have a bit of a problem with this, though, because it's so grey area, right? Like, it's so marginal. Did he intend it? Did he not? you're going to end up giving drive-throughs for drivers who were pushed off the track, but the other guy says, oh, we cut the corner deliberately. I think you if you're going to do penalties of that severity, I think you are opening yourself up to, and you will end up punishing some innocent drivers unfairly for doing so, but would it penalise heavily, and would it deter drivers doing what Verstappen and Leclerc did? Maybe it would go some way to doing that. There was also drama here, right? So Liam Lawson wasn't very happy about Sainz because they had the first lap contact and the damage. Now, why that actually happened was here. So Sainz is coming into turn one. Ocon gets a big moment in front of him, so Sainz also has a slight correction. Then it looks like he gets into the dirty air of Ocon's car. He has his own little correction here. Lawson is coming around the outside. It was kind of a bit of a chain of events, really, because Lawson actually was quite well positioned to try and go around the outside of Sainz. But because Ocon had a moment and then Sainz had a moment, that left Lawson in a pretty difficult position. And then Sainz has a correction himself, and then that sends him straight into the side of Lawson. You can see the absolute explosion. And, it looks at this point that Sainz is still intending to make the corner, but he can see in front of him that other drivers have just bailed out. There's Max over on the left-hand side, trying to keep it out of the wall. Piastri also went very deep in turn one, which is why he lost a couple of positions. And eventually, Sainz decides half a second later, you know what, screw this. I'm not going to try and get back on the track. I'm just going to bail out over the grass. And again, it's like, did that lead to the contact with Lawson? I'm not so sure that it did necessarily, but I think it's very clear that the drivers go into turn one Mexico with a strong belief that if anything slightly goes wrong, I'm just bailing out over the grass. And that's probably not what should be encouraged. So do you change the corner? Possible. Do you add gravel? Also possible. I think you've probably got to do something at this point going into next year. Norris and Behrman both topped the power rankings. I just wanted to share this now rather than at the end because it was relevant for Sainz. People were like, hang on a second, how did Sainz get in the top 10 when he had the contact with Lawson turn one? Again, I don't know if it was entirely Sainz's fault, but I can understand that discussion. And then he spun out of the race at the end of his own accord, as far as we understand. So I'm not really sure how he made it top 10, but Norris and Behrman both got 10 out of 10 performances. Very difficult to fault either of their weekends. But it is easy to fault something else, and that is the FIA. So the last few days has been lots of drama on this, because we thought, at least it was heavily speculated in the media, that one of the teams had breached the cap. Now, I gave my opinion on this yesterday that it's quite plausible that the teams were very close to doing so, or there was some clever accounting going on, and technically they didn't. But it has caused a lot of controversy, right? And it's interesting that Planet F1 actually did a whole article to describe this in detail, because there is understandable speculation that, hang on a second, the media was telling us, there were loads of sources saying, oh, McLaren, Mercedes, Williams, or whoever, they could be in trouble due to damage or due to spending too much for the upgrades, or whatever the case is, right? There was a feeling that there was at least something going on there. And then when the FIA come out and say that everyone is clean apart from Aston Martin who didn't sign something properly, then people are like, hang on a second, where there is smoke, usually there is some sort of fire. So now people are like, oh, are the FIA up to their old tricks, right? And you can understand why this discussion has become rather prevalent. And it's interesting what Planet F1 say here in the article. So what changed? It was heavily implied a slam dunk penalty was incoming for one team, but that evaporated into full compliance. So what changed was the speculation from multiple disconnected sources that wildly wrong, and why the delay? Because if there's a delay in announcing, that it implies that at least some teams are getting looked at rather heavily. And yeah, as we say, right, this was not just one source, right? We had all sorts of people saying that, oh, watch out about this, something's happening. So it's not easy to come to a great decision here, other than there are those who are adamant that an overspend transpired and either went unpunished or was resolved with an agreement kept out of the public eye. Right or otherwise, it's a point that threatens to undermine the cost cap process and needs to be addressed. Because, again, there's loads of speculation, loads of questions. Are the FIA doing their job right? Some people don't believe that all the teams really were in compliance. Maybe at some point down the line we're going to get more information on this. But that's the point. Do we trust the FIA to do the right thing when it comes to the cost cap? Maybe yes. Do we believe that they can actually do it properly with the, the way that their organisation is structured? That's where my question is, right? Like, I want to believe that the people who are making these decisions at the FIA are trying to correctly follow the rules that they have implemented and are justly approaching these situations. But I don't know if I'm convinced that they have the power to do so, and really the ability to properly govern this sport. That's one concern about the FIA. The other concern is about the general democratic situation, right? If you guys haven't been following this, Laura Villas, there was one other as well, but also Tim Mayer, they were trying to become the new FIA president and, well, battling Mohammed Ben Sulayem. Now, as it turned out, there was a remarkable loophole that Ben Sulayem has found to maintain power. That is because in order to properly submit a candidacy, you need to submit what your cabinet would be. One of those cabinet members has to come from various different regions, and one of those regions is South America. Turns out there is only one possible vice presidential candidate from South America. It actually is Bernie Ecclestone's wife. She's pledged her support to Ben Sulayem, and therefore she effectively becomes the most important person in the FIA, because there are no other candidates that could give their support to any other presidential candidate, and therefore Ben Sulayem wins by default, which is outrageous. Now, we wonder where this would go, right? And Laura Villas, she's not happy about it, nor should she be, and she has expressed the intention to stand in December's presidential election against incumbent Ben Sulayem, but a quirk of the rules means no other candidate is able to run. The legal summons request to Paris court, so she's taken legal action on this and is hoping that the election will be postponed as a result until they can resolve this situation. Good luck getting that to happen, but we'll see. The court hearing is set for the 10th of November. The legal action is grounded on Article 1.3 of the FIA statutes, which commits the FIA to respect the highest standards of governance, transparency, and democracy. So that's the thing, right? The FIA, it's an independent body. Should it have to be democratic? It is an argument to be made. But their own statutes say that they respect the highest standards of democracy. So their own statutes imply that their organisation is democratic. And clearly that's not, seemingly at least, what we are currently seeing. Now, of course, it's based on French law. That's why they're doing it in Paris. As I've stated publicly, I'm not acting against the FIA. I'm acting to protect it. Democracy is not a threat to the FIA. It is its strength. So, fair play, Villas is pushing this, and Tim Mayer is also on board as well. So Tim Mayer's FIA Forward campaign is also understood to be working with her legal team. So they're going to give this a go in court, and as well I think they should. She also went on to say, I have twice tried to open a constructive dialogue with the FIA on essential matters such as internal democracy and the transparency of electoral rules. The responses received were not up to the challenge. I am not acting against the FIA. That's the quote that we already saw. But let's talk about the title fight, right? Because we just had a double header. We've got one weekend off. Then we're back at it again towards the end of the season. Max scored 48 points over the Austin, Mexico doubleheader. Lando scored 43. Then you get the Ferrari drivers, Russell, then Oscar Piastri at 20. Behrman isn't even too far behind that. Russell technically could still win the championship. There are 116 points left up for grabs. So that's the key number, 116 points left. That, of course, is 4 times 25 for 4 races, 2 times 8 for sprints. Russell is 99 points behind, so technically he can still win. Probably after Brazil, that is no longer the case. Max, on another note, not one we've been talking about for some time, but based on the controversy with Hamilton in Mexico, there were some discussions on, could there be penalties applied? And for some time, Max has actually been on the verge of a race ban, right? If he did another George Russell crash back in Spain, then he would be getting banned, but not anymore, because his penalty points, because Mexico last year was so hectic, have gone down from 9 down to 6. So Max is not at threat now from a race ban. It wasn't really a massive talking point, but just relevant to know that Max will at least be racing almost certainly in all of these upcoming 4 Grand Prix. But is it just an illusion, right? 36 points is, in the grand context of F1 championship deficits, pretty substantial. It doesn't feel that much, maybe, just because Max has cut that from 104 whatever after Zandvoort down to only 36 today. But that's to a different championship leader. It was to Oscar, now it's to Lando, and Lando's looking much the stronger as it stands. We know that qualifying is critically important this season. 15 of the 20 races have been won by the driver who led the first lap, and arguably Spa, once we actually got racing, Oscar took the lead and then he won. So arguably you could count that as 16 of 20, which is a lot. Shows how important qualifying is, getting to turn 1 first and leading the Grand Prix from there. Max Verstappen, as of late, has looked like a monster in qualifying. The RB21 has looked very good, but it wasn't the same story around Mexico. It seemed to propose a couple of more difficult challenges for the RB21 to get on top of, and whatever Red Bull tried, they couldn't quite get their car in the right spot. Now, Max ended up finishing 3rd anyway, which was a good result in the circumstances, but he is concerned about some of the upcoming tracks. Brazil, look, it's been a bit up and down for Red Bull over the last few years, to be fair, but we know what Max did there last year, so he will be very confident that Brazil, he can try to get the job done. Of course, it's a sprint race as well, as is Qatar, with a couple of rounds to go, but it is a question in Vegas. According to some reports during the weekends, Max said that based on what was happening, so this I think was pretty much on the Sunday before the Grand Prix, and based on what happened on the Saturday, Max and the feeling at Red Bull was that the same issues they're running into here, they may also suffer with in Las Vegas. Now, that's pretty interesting because they're not very similar circuits. They do have a massive straight, okay, but in Mexico, they're running very high downforce because of the thinner air. In Las Vegas, they will be running near the lower end of the downforce spectrum, but maybe there's something that Red Bull believe that they found in their car. The reason why they were struggling to get the balance to work right in Mexico, the corner profiles, that also may play out similarly in Las Vegas, which is, for Max, a big issue, right? Now, whether this comes true or not is a different question, but Max effectively needs to win everything. If he has one weekend where he's, 5th at best or something, the McLarens are probably going to outscore him. Certainly Lando probably will on current form. And if Max gets outscored anywhere from now to the end of the season, it's pretty unlikely that he wins the championship. So Sao Paulo is coming up, then Las Vegas towards the end of the month. Then, of course, that is the first leg of the triple header, the Las Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi championship decider. And it's worth thinking about these tracks because the McLaren will be strong in Qatar and Abu Dhabi. It might not necessarily win, right? Like Max might be able to win in Qatar. Abu Dhabi really does feel like, based on what happened last year, I would be pretty surprised if the McLaren isn't the fastest car there. Winning is a different story because the pressure will be immense, but Lando handled the pressure well this time last year. So Abu Dhabi, I think, really feels like a McLaren track. Qatar, I think the McLaren will be very strong, but I do believe that Max could win. Brazil, I think the McLaren will be strong, but I think Max could win. Vegas, this is the question mark, but it's actually not just a question mark for Max. Yeah, Max might be like, not sure about this track, but the same is definitely true of the McLarens, right? This has been their bogey track the last couple of seasons, McLaren, in Las Vegas. So it might be good news for them that if Max is kind of struggling there, then he might not take a big dent out of McLaren. But we know that the limitations of their car, it's not great at top, straight line speeds. They've made some sacrifices for cooling that have affected that. That is an important factor in Las Vegas, but there were also other things, right? This is the first race in 2023. Lando crashed out on the second lap, if you guys remember, just before the left-hander onto the Las Vegas strip. He hit a bump, crashed out, hit the wall. Piastri finished that race only 10th, 30 seconds off the lead. And then last year, of course, it was the absolute Mercedes masterclass when Ferrari were also pretty good. Max was only 5th, but look where Lando and Oscar were. Lando Norris was 43 seconds off the win of that Grand Prix. Oscar was 51 seconds off, not far ahead of the Haas of Nico Hülkenberg. So that was where McLaren were last year. They've not finished Las Vegas better than 6th so far. Their results around Las Vegas are 6th, 7th, 10th and DNF. It's not a great return in the last 2 years. Verstappen's results are 1st and 5th. So look, we'll see what happens. But Las Vegas could be a critical Grand Prix, right? Because if McLaren are good there and Lando wins or something, the championship is done. Las Vegas is really, it should be the weekend for Max to gain back a load of points. That is probably the way that he would like to look at it. But according to some rumours, that might be easier said than done. So tweet your thoughts in the comments below. Just one final thing. Felipe Massa's court case begins over the 2008 championship, the Singapore Grand Prix crashgate and all that type of stuff. Look, Is he at this point intending to actually overturn the championship results? No, I think he knows that he's not going to be crowned world champion in retrospect, but he is trying to seek £64 million in damages, so I guess fair enough. So drink to your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.